In 1996, Plant City, Florida, a town that had dealt with serial killer Bobby Joe Long in 1984, would experience another set of murders that would throw the town into disarray. Unfortunately, when all was said and done, 2 women, Christy Cowan and Denise Roach, would be dead. Christy Elizabeth Cowan had graduated at the top of her class and aspired to become a nurse, beginning her career as a certified nursing assistant, mainly caring for the elderly. Unfortunately, in March of 1996, she was arrested for drug possession, and 2 months later, the judge sentenced her to a drug treatment center in Ocala. However, on May 9th, while in the transport van, on the way to the facility, she escaped. This would be the biggest mistake of her life, and 3 days later, she was dead. Denise Elaine Roach had come to Florida from New York, and just like Christy, she struggled with drug addiction, a habit she formed when she was just a teenager. Before ending up near Plant City, she lived near Miami in Hialeah before moving to Tampa, where her father worked as an executive at a finance company. Due to their drug addictions, they both spent time on the streets trying to survive. However, in 1996, everything would come crashing down. On May 28, 1996, Marion Whitehurst visited her property and was surprised to find her handyman, Samuel Smithers, in the carport, washing a long-handled axe. When she asked him what he was doing, he responded that he had used the axe to trim some branches. However, Marion was shocked when she noticed a pool of blood, to which he claimed came from a small animal. At that point, Marion wasted no time calling the sheriff's office. When deputies arrived, Smithers was gone, but they could see faint drag marks leading to a nearby pond. That's when they discovered the bodies of both Christy and Denise. It didn't take investigators long to track Smithers down due to the decal on his truck that read Bad Boys Club. After being brought in, Smithers denied involvement and volunteered to take a polygraph. The results weren't good, and once detectives learned he was a deacon from the First Baptist Church of Plant City, they made a religious appeal to him. He then agreed to talk, but insisted his wife be present during the official interview. As they questioned him, they learned he worked as an electrician for Boral Electric and had clocked out on the day of the murders at 5:23 p.m. from the Equifax project site. Smithers claimed this was his alibi, but a detective later test drove the route to where Christy and Denise were found murdered and learned he had ample time to get there. Apparently, both women had resorted to prostitution to feed their drug habit, and that's how they encountered Smithers. Christy was the first victim, and he picked her up on May 12, 1996. He then drove her to the pond on Turkey Creek Road, where he murdered her. 16 days later, on May 28, 1996, he picked Denise up and drove her to the same pond and murdered her just like Christy. Smithers' trouble with the law began when he was a young man. He had set fires to multiple churches and was later arrested and sentenced to 4 years in prison. During that time, he worked as a firefighter, putting out the same fires he set, and was praised for a job well done. After getting out, he moved to Plant City, Florida, where he got a job as an electrician and handyman. He also married and had a son. By the time he was 43, he was a deacon at the First Baptist Church of Plant City, and by all outward appearances was a dedicated family man who had left a life of crime far behind. At least, that's what he made everyone believe. In 1996, Marion had entrusted Smithers to maintain a 27-acre rural property with 3 ponds, a site that he would eventually use to commit his heinous acts. His wife, Sharon, assumed that when her husband left every morning at 5 a.m., he was going to work, but he would first drive through the sex trade district of Tampa looking for a victim, which he eventually found. Investigators determined that Smithers had picked the women up at different times at a motel and made arrangements to take them to the vacant home on the property he maintained. Evidence included his fingerprint in the kitchen, DNA in the carport, a video of him with Christy, and identification of his pickup truck by other women in the area. When faced with all the evidence against him, he admitted to being on the property with both women. However, he said Denise and him got into an argument, and he pushed her, causing her head to strike a board. He said the next day he moved her body to the pond. As for Christy, He said she demanded money and threw a drink at him, so he killed her with an axe before dragging her to the pond as well. The medical examiner, however, noted that the injuries were far more severe than what Smithers made them out to be. It was found that Denise had 16 skull puncture wounds, facial fractures, and injuries consistent with strangulation. Christy, on the other hand, had chop wounds to her head, blunt force trauma to the jaw, and just like Denise, had signs of manual strangulation. When she went into the pond, the medical examiner said she was likely only unconscious. At trial, Smithers changed his story and said he was being blackmailed. He claimed that unknown men were using the Whitehurst property for drug drops and that they were the ones who killed both women. The jury didn't buy it, and in 1999, he was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. At his hearing, Christy Cowan's father asked the judge to impose life, and while it was heavily considered in the end, he received the death penalty. That death sentence was later upheld by the Florida Supreme Court. More than 20 years later, on September 12, 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis signed a death warrant for Samuel Lee Smithers. His execution is scheduled for October 14, 2025 at 6 p.m. at the Florida State Prison. If carried out, it will be Florida's 14th execution in 2025. More executions in a single year than any other Florida governor since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. George Smith, who went by the nickname Smitty, was born in 1924. At 67, he lived in Prunedale, California, and was the proud owner of Smith's Restaurant. It wasn't fancy, but it was a place locals loved and something he was very proud of. Attached to the restaurant was his home he shared with his wife Anna and mother-in-law, 79-year-old Eva Thompson. Unfortunately, Eva was bedridden, and family took turns helping with her care. On Veterans Day, November 11, 1991, Anna left the house to run errands. When she came back, she walked into a horrifying scene. Inside, both Smitty and Eva were dead. Smitty had been stabbed to death with a kitchen knife. It appeared he had been sitting at his desk doing some bookkeeping when the killer came up from behind with a kitchen knife. Eva, who couldn't even get out of bed on her own, had been beaten, strangled, and had sustained a fatal wound to her neck with the same knife. Investigators discovered that the screen on the door had been cut and was most likely where the intruder entered. Smitty's bedroom had been ransacked, and cash was missing. Detectives immediately looked at people close to the restaurant, including former employees. One name stood out, 52-year-old Ira Ulysses Bastion. He knew the layout of the property, and shoe impressions matched shoes provided by his then-girlfriend. But in the early 90s, without modern DNA tools, there wasn't enough to charge him. The case went cold for decades and weighed heavily on their loved ones, the community, and Monterey County investigators. For years, neighbors rumored that the killer was a drug-addicted criminal who was searching for hidden valuables such as gold coins and $2 bills to sell for drug money. Fast forward to 2024, when a cold case task force took another look at the case. Upon testing evidence from the scene, they found DNA that was consistent with Ira Bastion. His DNA was found on the handle of the knife and on Eva's clothes. Shoe impressions left in the dirt outside the restaurant also matched that pair of shoes Bastion's then-girlfriend at the time had given them. On July 15, 2024, Bastion was arrested in Fresno, California, and after a 10-day trial in the summer of 2025, he was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. On September 24, 2025, 86-year-old Bastion was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, finally bringing some closure to Smitty and Eva's family after 34 long, agonizing years. Ryan Roy Cooper was born on June 1, 1979, in Waterloo, Iowa, to Jan and Connie Cooper. He graduated from North Tama High School in 1998 and then pursued his passion for farming by joining the family farm and continuing the family legacy with his brothers Jason and Aaron. He also began raising a family of his own and was described as a quiet and gentle man who generally got along with everyone. Ryan had one child with his first wife, a boy he named Cole Roy. Unfortunately, the marriage didn't last, but he wouldn't stay single for long after meeting Karina Alpers. They married and together had 2 sons and a daughter, Cade, Cable, and Cortland. Ryan adored his children, and everyone who knew them said he was great with all of them. Unfortunately, when he was 42 years old, a horrible tragedy occurred. On June 18, 2021, a little after 4:30 a.m., a call came into 911 to report a shooting. When police arrived, they found Ryan dead in his recliner with 2 gunshot wounds to the face. Strangely, Karina was found sitting on top of him, crying and covered in blood, but not attempting CPR. As for the kids, they were still asleep upstairs. When questioned, Karina told police that she'd been asleep upstairs with the kids, woke up in the early hours, went downstairs and found Ryan in the recliner. She then strangely called Ryan's brother, Aaron Cooper, before calling 911 because she said he was closer by and worked as a first responder. She said she also feared there was an intruder in the home. Investigators were very skeptical of her story, as was Ryan's family. As the investigation continued, Ryan's family, even though they suspected Karina's involvement, had to bite their tongues in order to remain in their niece and nephew's lives. However, Karina tried to distance herself from them. Investigators then learned about a Snapchat notification on Karina's phone from the name Houston D. Turns out the man was 28-year-old Houston William Danker, a client at her salon. She was asked point-blank if she was having an intimate relationship with this person, but denied the allegations. However, investigators already had information that the two were engaged in an affair and had even discussed having a family together and possibly using IVF treatments. They also learned that in the hours before and after Ryan's murder, they continued Snapchatting with each other. Karina denied everything and insisted her marriage was healthy and adamantly denied the affair. However, when presented with the electronic evidence, she became irate. As the detective was walking out of the room, she said if she knew who killed Ryan, she would have killed that MFer, and also said she planned to hire a private investigator. Danker was also questioned and claimed he was just her gay best friend.
I don't want you to get too nervous about it, because if you had an affair with Karina, it doesn't make you guilty of anything other than you had an affair with her.
Right. Well, and that I'll put it this way. I'll completely dumb it down. So, like,
right.
With me and Karina, the hard thing with all that rumor being spread is I was literally sitting there like I would say, a gay best friend. I was having, me and my baby mama split up, okay? I was getting my hair cut by Karina, and I have 2 kids,
Right.
She loves kids, whatever, and she always told me, if you're ever in a pinch, hey, I don't have a problem watching your kids, whatever. And so we were all, everybody was friends, whatever, well then, she watched my kids a couple times when I was in a pinch. Well, then it fucking, how small towns talk,
Exactly.
Houston's kids are over at Karina's, he's nailing her, and then, and I guess that's probably where Ryan probably got upset, if he...
But text messages proved otherwise, showing sexually graphic messages between them. 3 years after the murder, in February 2024, 48-year-old Karina Cooper, 28-year-old Houston Danker were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors alleged that they conspired together to kill Ryan so that Karina could receive the life insurance money, which totaled $500,000. She received that money on December 22, 2021. In July 2025, Karina was found guilty of first-degree murder. On Friday, September 19, 2025, at her sentencing hearing, when given the opportunity to address Ryan's family, she declined. In the end, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was also ordered to pay victim restitution in the amount of $150,000 to the estate of Ryan Cooper. A month later, in August 2025, on what was supposed to be Danker's first day of trial, he pleaded guilty, just moments before jury selection was set to begin. He then acknowledged to the judge that he and Karina Cooper were lovers and had planned the murder together over the course of 4 to 5 months. His sentencing date is currently set for October 3rd, 2025 at 9 a.m. Tina Sue Heins was born on February 27, 1974, to Sue and William Livernash, and grew up in Rudolph, Wisconsin. She was described as a very compassionate and caring individual. Her family later moved to Jacksonville, Florida, where Tina graduated from Assumption Catholic High School in 1992. At 19, she married Jeremy Heins, a Navy sailor, on December 30, 1993, in a courthouse ceremony in Jacksonville. 4 months later, she was 15 weeks pregnant and living in an apartment at the Heron Point Apartments in Mayport, Florida, a small community between Naval Station Mayport and the St. Johns River in Jacksonville. Jeremy's 19-year-old brother, Chad Heins, also lived there, waiting for his fiancée in Wisconsin to join him. Tina worked at the Sea Turtle Inn and restaurant in Atlanta Beach, Florida, and was also making plans to move back to Wisconsin in order to attend the University of Wisconsin-Stout. She had even enrolled in her first semester, but sadly, she would never get the chance to attend. On April 16, 1994, Tina spoke with her family by phone while at work. Around 2:30 a.m., she arrived back at the apartment after her shift. Chad had already returned home 2 hours earlier and was asleep on the couch. He was a very deep sleeper, especially after drinking. Her husband, Jeremy, on the other hand, was still at the Mayport Naval Station. At around 5:45 a.m., Chad woke up to the sound of the fire alarm, smelled smoke, and immediately found 3 small fires, including one on the couch he was sleeping on. He quickly put them out, discovered a horrifying scene in Tina's room, and then ran to a neighboring apartment for help. When police arrived, they found Tina's remains on her bed. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed numerous times, including a fatal slash to the neck. She also had a pillowcase over her head. 19-year-old Chad immediately became a suspect because investigators couldn't fathom him sleeping through the ordeal. However, DNA collected from under Tina's nails, found on hairs, and semen from the bed sheets all pointed to an unknown male, neither Chad nor Jeremy. Despite this, Chad was convicted in 1996 based on jailhouse informants' statements and questionable hair analysis. However, there is no physical evidence linking Chad to the crime. In fact, a forensic analyst confirmed that the DNA and hair did not belong to him. Prosecutors didn't seem to care and insisted Chad had murdered Tina in a jealous rage. Plus, his case wasn't helped by 2 jailhouse informants who lied and said he confessed to them. After being convicted in December 1996, he was sentenced to life in prison. In 2001, Chad wrote to the Innocence Project, which took up his case with the help of the local Innocence Project in Florida. In 2003, with pro bono counsel Robert Beckham, they filed for DNA testing on skin cells from under Tina's fingernails. She had defense wounds, suggesting the attacker's DNA might be present. Once again, the results revealed the male DNA was not from Chad or Jeremy Heins. Chad's attorneys requested more tests to compare the unknown DNA to the 3 hairs found on Tina's body. Further testing in 2005 confirmed that the hairs matched the DNA from under the fingernails, all of which came from one unknown male. During appeals, Chad's attorneys learned that a fingerprint was found before trial on the sink faucet in the blood-stained bathroom, where the perpetrator tried to clean up. Police and prosecutors knew the print didn't match Chad, Tina, or Jeremy, but the jury was never informed of this. It's unclear if Chad's defense attorney was informed about the print. In 2006, Chad's conviction was vacated by the DNA results. Prosecutors then began preparing for a possible retrial. Meanwhile, Chad was transferred from the state prison to the county jail to wait for further proceedings. During this time, Robert Link joined as pro bono co-counsel for retrial preparations. While preparing for retrial, the Innocence Project requested DNA testing on the semen found on the bed sheets. Tests conducted in November 2007 matched the DNA to the hairs and skin cells, indicating that one unknown male was present and did not match Jeremy or Chad. The profile was submitted to CODIS, but showed no match. Chad spent over 13 years in custody, 10 years in prison, 3 in county jail, before DNA advances led to his release in 2007. After Chad's release at the age of 33, Tina's case DNA was run through CODIS on a weekly basis for years with no matches. Investigators began looking for a new suspect and interviewed many people connected to Tina, collecting DNA from each, but found no match. In 2017, the state attorney's office was determined to finally have answers in the case, and 4 years later, in 2021, they enlisted the help of Othram. Using genetic genealogy and investigative leads, they identified the suspect as Shane Ziegler, a close friend of Tina's husband, Jeremy. Authorities and the lab confirmed the match to Ziegler, who served with Jeremy on the USS Leyte Gulf and lived near Tina at the time of her murder. Ziegler was Jeremy's close friend and stood as a witness at Tina and Jeremy's wedding several months before her murder. He was also serving aboard the USS Leyte Gulf, and it was docked at the naval station. For 3 decades, Ziegler evaded suspicion, even allowing an innocent man to take the fall. While it remains unclear if he knew about Chad's sleep disorder, it's definitely possible. In August 2025, 52-year-old Ziegler was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and sexual battery. He was living with his mother near Atlanta, Georgia, when he was taken into custody on September 4th. He's currently being held in Duval County Jail without bond, awaiting further proceedings. In Tina's memory, her loved ones established the Tracks for Tina 5K run and the Tina Livernash Memorial Scholarship for Catholic school students. Her Wisconsin Rapids community continues to honor her legacy. Carter Wesley Gordon Curtis was born on July 15, 2022, to Taylor Curtis and Eugene Rantanen. He was a very happy baby, and even at 19 months old, he enjoyed making his family laugh. Carter lived with his parents on the Lawns Reservation of the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community, tribal land in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. On February 19, 2024, Carter and his father Eugene were home alone when he called 911 to report that Carter wasn't breathing. He told the dispatcher that he had found his son slumped over the bed after leaving him there for a nap. He also mentioned cuts on Carter's tongue. Carter briefly regained consciousness and was rushed to the hospital, where medical staff documented bruising on his head, torso, and other regions. A CT scan revealed internal bleeding, and medical staff noted that the bruising appeared consistent with fingertip marks. A doctor questioned Eugene about what happened, and he insisted that Carter was fine when he went down for a nap. He said he only left Carter alone for about 5 minutes, and when he returned, he said Carter was sitting up, slumped over, and limp. He picked him up, noticed he wasn't breathing, and called 911. Carter's mother, Taylor, was also questioned and said that when she stopped by between work shifts, Carter was fine. Sadly, 5 days later, on February 24, 2024, Carter died from his injuries. It wasn't long before the medical examiner had destroyed Eugene's story. He found that Carter had died from blunt force trauma and ruled his death a homicide. He had suffered multiple subdural hematomas, extensive bruising on his head, torso, scrotum, and buttocks, and evidence of abusive head trauma. It was obvious the poor baby had been severely beaten. Eugene was then arrested and charged with his murder. Apparently, Taylor was arranging for Carter to be adopted, but Eugene insisted on maintaining custody. Whether he abused him because of the upcoming adoption or resisted the adoption to continue the abuse is unknown. It was also discovered that Eugene had spent time in prison 16 years before Carter was even born. He was sentenced in 2010 in federal court to 57 months of prison, plus 10 years of supervised release. He was also ordered to register as a sex offender because he was 18 when he engaged in a sexual act with a 14-year-old on tribal land in 2006. On May 9, 2025, Eugene was found guilty of murder and first-degree child abuse, and in August 2025, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.